Welcome to today's episode of the Bryan G Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gutierrez. If you're enjoying the show and receiving value from our content, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss out on the next episode. Now let's check out today's show. Welcome to the Bryan G Real Estate Podcast. Today, I'll be interviewing Michael Fischer from Ross Mortgage, and we're going to be talking about all things VA financing. So this is financing for our veterans and some of the benefits that they have. This is a topic that I think is really valuable, us bringing this information to veteran home buyers out there. You know, when I first started in this business, Michael, it was about 10 years ago now, and obviously new to the business. And I noticed in the first few years that my VA buyers, the few that I had, it was really difficult getting their offers accepted. And quite honestly, I'm like, these are the people who have given the most for our country, right? Who have sacrificed life and limb, right? And they're having the roughest time getting their offers accepted. It just didn't feel right to me, right? It actually kind of upset me, right? And so one thing that I did is, the National Association of Realtors has professional designations we can get. So I sought out the coursework to get my MRP, which is the Military Relocation Professional Designation. I know you're familiar with that. And what that means is it taught me a lot. It was a multi-day course, and it taught me as an agent a lot about what VA financing is. However, I'm not a loan officer, right? I'm not in that world exactly, right? So although I've learned in general what benefits are and how to present this to sellers, right, on behalf of the veteran, I rely on a few people such as Michael here. He's just a great source of information and helping me further understand VA financing, and in working with our clients together. Michael's just a great resource. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And if you wouldn't mind, just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Before I talk about myself, I think the reason that I'm actually here today, you kind of foreshadowed a little bit. You said you had struggled helping veterans get their offer accepted. And I think I randomly saw you running around town in one of your real estate shirts. I'm like, oh, it's a realtor. I'm a loan officer. I got to chase him down and give him a card. But then as we got chatting, I was telling you that my passion was to teach a class called Present a VA Offer the Seller Will Accept.
There you go.
And it clicked in your head and you're like, yes, I need to learn more about this. And you had mentioned, talking about the Military Relocation Professional course, good course to get agents the right mindset and understand the military lifestyle, but doesn't always dive as much into the specifics about the loan process.
Correct.
And so that's, when people ask me about myself, a lot of times they want to know professionally and, a little personal as well, but, professionally, I'm a branch manager. I'm a mortgage guy, and that can seem a little bit boring. Nobody wants to just stare at numbers all day and move W-2s and tax returns around and, kill themselves with paper cuts. But it becomes cool when you focus on the home ownership part and helping people learn how to build wealth, manage debt, get the house they want, figure out where they're going to live and go have their kids go to school and all that kind of stuff. It's really, really cool and exciting and fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I, over the years, had saw similar challenges in the market with veterans struggling to get their offers accepted. I had surrounded myself by folks in a company that like to teach real estate agents, teach classes and things like that. One of the classes that we taught, I thought we did really, really well, was the, how to present the VA offers and how to get them accepted. And I kind of took that to heart and I ran with it, and I started teaching it more myself and started helping other loan officers learn how to teach it. And ultimately spun it off into, I guess, a side brand, a side business, a side hustle, a passion. I got it on my shirt today, Veteran Mortgage Advisor. I mean, like I'll help loan officers learn how to educate others on the VA home loan benefit.
That's great.
All day, every day. So that's a big part of what I do is helping others learn more about how the nuts and bolts of it work and how to make good decisions. I call the program Veteran Mortgage Advisor because you want to give people all the tools so they can make an informed choice.
There you go.
And sometimes using VA financing may not be the right route. Sometimes it is. But either way, we find that a lot of the veterans are struggling to understand what they can and can't do, or they're struggling to get an offer accepted. And it comes down to the real estate community and the lending community not really knowing the product, not knowing the
Right.
product isn't that bad. We'll get into that, I'm sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
But for me, my passion is talking about VA loans. If you ask me to come on another VA podcast, if you're listening to this, like I probably will, because I just love talking about it all day, every day. But I live fairly close and local and in South Lyon, and I got a whole bunch of kids, and I like to play golf and all that kind of stuff. So, track me down and hit me up, and we'll tee off soon.
That sounds great. I'm going to take you up on that. But no, this is really great, and this is one of the things that I like about you is that you do have the heart of a teacher, right? You do want to share what you know to help others, and that has always been at the center of my business. And it's nice to be surrounded with other professionals that have a similar outlook on how our businesses are not only successful, but how our businesses help others, right? That's one of the great joys of doing real estate is, purchasing real estate is not just merely acquiring and liquidating an asset. It's a lifestyle change. It's a commute change for a veteran. Are they still active duty? Are they not? Right? I mean, have they retired? There's a lot of things going on in a normal selling and buying situation. So, helping inform people, and what people really need is just information, right? Just useful information. And what I like is how you just break everything down in very understandable terms, because a lot of these, government benefits can get very convoluted, and lawyers have written the description, right? So it's like, but yeah. So today's goal is we're going to kind of break this down. So I guess the first question I have is, you know, we talk about educating people. Do veterans truly know their benefit when it comes to housing? What's been your experience with that?
My experience with that is that most veterans don't know about their VA home benefit at the level that they really should need to if they want to maximize their ability to build wealth and manage debt and get a home. And it's not necessarily their fault. It's not like they were given an opportunity and just didn't pay attention. The reality is the VA itself doesn't have a quote unquote marketing, sales, and education department where they reach out to the vets and they teach them about what their benefits are.
Hmm.
They certainly have support divisions, and oftentimes on calls like this, I'll talk about the regional loan center and how helpful they are. But the regional loan center doesn't buy lists of veterans and send them materials on how to use their VA home loan benefit.
Okay.
So that
Okay.
actually, the job of kind of helping them learn how it all works as far as the numbers and qualifying and what they can do with it actually falls in the lending and real estate community.
Okay. All right.
And so that's so a lot of veterans don't necessarily learn a whole lot until they get interested in buying a house, and then they kind of go click online. And as you and I both know, the online game is really, it starts out with the marketing game to get the eyes, to get their attention, to get them to click, to get them
Right.
to fill out a form or whatever. So in some cases, they find good information, but in some cases, they just find a bunch of salesmen, or find people in cubicles that are probably good people, good intentioned people,
Hmm.
but they may not be as seasoned or have as much experience, or may not have dedicated the years of learning all the different scenarios and situations and things that a veteran family might need to know when they're buying their first home, or when they're changing stations, or they're trying to buy while they're serving.
Hmm.
And that's where I often say who you work with matters.
Sure.
And I feel like one
Absolutely.
of the challenges in the VA space, and one of the things that you mentioned before, with veterans having a hard time getting offers accepted, comes down to most real estate agents, most lenders, and you and I have talked about this in the past, don't do a lot of transactions with veterans on a monthly or annual basis. And oftentimes they'll say, oh, well, this is just a niche. It's a small piece of what I do, but I'm good at it.
Hmm.
But then they only work with one veteran a year or two veterans a year.
Right.
I mean, the average lender closes less than three VA loans a year, depending on the part of the country you're in. Some lenders average one VA loan a year. So
Gotcha.
if you can think about that, and if you have a vet that's working with a lender that does one a year, the odds of that lender maybe making a small mistake or slowing down a little bit, or the transaction not going smoothly,
Hmm.
could be a little bit higher, not because they don't want to help, it's just because they haven't been there enough and haven't had the experience.
Right. Right. And it's how I look at it. It's It's one thing to have knowledge about something, but it's something else to have an understanding
Hmm.
of something. And that's where having an experienced agent, an experienced, loan officer or lender working with is so important. So who you work with really does matter.
Hmm.
It really is significant.
Yep.
So we've kind of talked about, how, my experience and how you have in the past, how people have struggled to get VA loans accepted by sellers uh, on a regular basis. So why is that? Why are we challenged with that?
Well, I believe that the challenge starts with what we often call myths. I mean, some of the classes that I teach are called myth busting, but there's some reality to the myth. There's a reason why the myths exist,
Okay.
and it's based in things that might have happened in the past, or transactions that might have gone south with an agent, or a struggle that somebody had, or a transaction maybe didn't go smoothly. And so I like to dive into what we call myth busting, right?
Okay. Yep.
Bust the myths and explain, well, I heard a story from an agent that had a transaction that didn't close smoothly. Let's talk about why. And then when
Right.
we start diving into why, we realize maybe it wasn't the VA product itself. Maybe it was that the lender didn't do a good job pre-qualifying that person.
Gotcha.
And maybe they would have had a problem with a similar transaction that was FHA or conventional or different financing type
Hmm.
if they had that same type of approach to qualifying buyers.
Okay. So if we have, so let's do a little contrast and compare.
Mm-hmm.
So conventional is what we see the most,
Yep.
right? So how about just a little back and forth on how VA differs a little bit from conventional financing?
Sure. So VA is financing that can go up to 100% of the appraised value on a house. So in a purchase, that's generally going to be the purchase price.
Hmm.
Hopefully, the purchase and appraised value line up. Probably talk about more about that later.
Right.
Um, but so for the veteran, it's cool because they can hang on to some of their cash to do renovations, to keep money in reserve, to start their businesses, just to get ahead in life, if you will. And I think part of the misperception or myth, like we've been talking about, in a case like that is that a veteran who doesn't necessarily put money down is broke.
Right, and that's the most important one. That's the first big myth.
It's
Is
first huge
because
myth.
there's no money down in the VA means that the VA buyer
Mhm.
lacks funds. Not true. It's a benefit to the veteran to not be required
Yep.
to put a down payment.
Yep.
It's optional. They can if they want,
Hmm.
right? And so once again, see this as an agent when I present this to a seller, hey, listing agent, just so you know, we have no money down, but this is how VA financing goes, and
Hmm.
that's a normal. You know what I mean? I explain that, and I
Hmm.
really go out of my way to do it. So that's probably like the biggest myth that I
Well,
see first
and on the
come
agent
up.
side, a lot of agents think that they have to treat the offer differently, which isn't true. You could treat it the same way. So, like if you had a conventional buyer, a buyer paying cash, let's say, the seller might turn back and say, "Well, Bryan, I mean, how do I know this person really is as good as you say? I need proof of funds." You hear that all the time.
Sure.
You can do the same thing on a VA loan. The seller could come back to you and say, "Hey, Bryan, I think this is zero down. This isn't a good offer. This person has no money." You say, "No, no, 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 no. Stop. We already know my person has money. I've talked to them and I've talked to my lender. We've got permission to share. Let's show you proof of funds, just like any other buyer.
There
We're
you
going to show
go.
you this person has, lots and lots of money, $100,000 plus. And in fact, they're better equipped to cover an appraisal shortfall if the appraisal doesn't come in than a borrower who put all their money down.
That's
Right.
right.
So there's a lot of ways to approach that. That's where I think again it comes back to education. So we were talking about, the benefits of VA loan. That's certainly one of them at zero down.
Hmm.
Another big one is that it doesn't have mortgage insurance or private mortgage insurance or an FHA. They just call it mortgage insurance.
So what would we call what we refer to as PMI?
PMI. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So all right. So explain that for people who may not know what PMI
Yep.
is, if you might explain it, please.
PMI is an additional monthly payment, and sometimes first-time home buyers look at it and go, "Oh, mortgage insurance, that's going to help me if I can't pay my bill." And unfortunately, no. It's really foreclosure insurance. It protects the bank, and loans where a buyer doesn't have 20% down, in many cases, require some kind of insurance. Well,
Right.
one of the huge benefits to the VA home loan is that the VA actually takes that that insurance risk for the veteran and covers it so that there isn't any kind of monthly payment for mortgage insurance.
Hmm.
So, like on a conventional or an FHA loan on a $300,000 house, the mortgage insurance could be $150 a month.
Mm.
So, VA oftentimes, even with a similar down payment, will have a much lower payment because there's no mortgage insurance. So, that's a huge benefit right there, too.
Oh yeah. Are there any other fees that that the veteran buyer can roll into their closing cost, or can roll into the loan? I'm sorry.
Well, it's a good time to talk about that. It's not
Hmm.
necessarily a part of the benefit itself to allow a veteran to just roll in any piece of a real estate transaction. And so sometimes I hear my friends in the mortgage space say, "Oh, that's a no loan, right? Like no closing costs, no down payment. You just
Right.
get in a loan for nothing." Well, that doesn't really truly exist. There are some expenses and costs and taxes, insurance, and no
Hmm.
matter how you dice it, some of the third parties have to get paid, and certainly the government has to get paid, and taxes and insurance guy has to get paid. So,
Sure.
so that money that adds up in the transaction can be financed, but if you're using VA financing, you can't finance it on top of the purchase price. What you could do is structure an offer where perhaps the seller was willing to make a contribution towards the veteran's closing costs and expenses. So you
Okay.
hear stories about veterans who close and say, "Oh, I bought with $0 out of pocket. I just closed a transaction over the Christmas holiday
Hmm.
in the Columbus area where the veteran literally closed with $0 out of pocket."
So see if I got this right. So the veteran is able to finance their closing costs. Is that
As in
correct?
the form of a seller's contribution only, not as part of the loan
Okay,
program.
not as part of the loan.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So if the seller agrees, so that's part of the misconception in the marketplace. It is
Okay.
one of the reasons that VA sometimes gets a bad rap because you'll get lenders and even realtors who roll into a transaction and don't truly explain to the selling side, this veteran doesn't have a lot of cash.
Right.
They can use the VA loan benefit. They qualify, they've got good rent history, they've got good credit,
Hmm.
their numbers look good. And I'm going to explain that next. There's another benefit to VA home loan and flexibility, but let's go back to this story. So, so you're explaining all these things to the seller, but maybe you didn't explain all these things in the beginning of the transaction.
Right.
And so the seller's looking at this going, wait a second, I don't like VA. And the agent doesn't like VA because they think maybe that lender told them, or maybe they just inferred that the VA is making them do this,
Correct. Right.
which is
And
not true at all.
right, because in a competitive situation, there is flexibility in structuring our VA
Mm-hmm.
buyer.
But you'll see some of these, man, I hate saying this publicly, but I'm going to say it. Headset jockeys, people that
Yeah.
they don't leave their house in snowy days like today and come and hang out with other professionals, like I'm hanging out with you. They
Right.
don't drive to their veterans closings. They don't show up to community events and things like that. They sit in a cubicle, and nothing against them. I used to do that. I used to work for one of these big Detroit companies and sat there. But I feel
Yeah.
like sometimes there's so much of a focus on the dollars and not the people
Mm.
that some of the people in those situations and those headsets are making poor decisions on how they're advising people to get their offers accepted. So I've seen a lot of veterans work with a headset company and come into a transaction and not describe to the listing and selling side that that veteran doesn't have a lot of cash. And then
Right.
all of a sudden, after underwriting and after the appraisal is done, they go, "Oh, well, in order to close this, we're going to need the seller to contribute $5,000."
Like, you're telling us now?
Right, you're telling us now. I hear this story every single
Oh
week,
my goodness, I know.
and
Right.
I'll tell you
Uh,
I'll tell you the lender after we're done recording. Anybody wants to message me, we'll talk about it. But yes, it's one of the headset companies. It happens all
yeah.
the time, so it puts a bad perception in the marketplace that veterans are broke and the offers are bad, which isn't true at all.
Right. And this is why whether it's with real estate agents or lenders, this is why work with an experienced professional, and then secondly, it's okay to interview and ask questions. Right. I mean, go ahead and do this, because you will see that professionals like us, we understand this process, and that is so very important. And this is true with any real estate transaction, but for the purposes of our discussion today in relation to VA, I think it's especially important.
Well, the last bullet point on that question that you asked about what is a major benefit to the VA home loan? It's flexibility.
Hmm.
The VA home loan is more flexible than other loan programs when it comes to a handful of things. Number one, the loan size. VA doesn't have a maximum loan size limit. In our part of the
Oh,
world,
interesting.
yeah, we certainly have a lot of engineers and accountants and tech people in our part of the world, don't we? I mean, GM Proving Ground's right down the street, and
right.
lots of tech companies in our area. So you will see veterans who went through the ranks, got degrees, the whole 9 yards, asking you questions about homes that are over the conventional loan limit. In today's day and age, in the 700, mid 700s, but over time, you'll listen to this a year or two later, who knows what it'll be. But ultimately, your veteran could buy $1 million, $1.5 million house with zero down.
Wow.
That's one of the benefits.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Like one of the few loan programs that somebody who really has their ducks in a row and qualifies can do that. Also, VA is flexible on the other end of the spectrum with veterans who may not have perfect credit, but can certainly afford to pay their bills. And, I just talked about a transaction I closed in Columbus. It was one of those types of transactions where the person, everything looks good. Like they can make their payments, but there might've been a divorce or something that happened in the middle and some credit got bruised a little bit. And they had to put things back in order.
Okay.
So, a situation like that, sometimes people don't have as much cash. They need some help from the seller. The transaction on paper doesn't look as good. And a lot of times people will compare something like that to like an FHA transaction, where the average person using FHA has that kind of profile. Well, at VA, the profiles are all across the board. You got people that have perfect credit situations, people that have less, because the VA is a very flexible loan program.
It's funny you mention that, because people do associate that with FHA. I don't know where that came from. They're like, every time this comes up, it's like, wasn't that kind of like FHA? It's like, no, two different animals, right? Two different worlds.
Yeah, man, don't get me started. I have a favorite saying that I picked up from a good friend of mine, and it's "Don't FHA my VA," because they're not the same. They're just not the same.
That should be a T-shirt.
We have one. I didn't wear it today. Yeah, I have one at home. Yeah,
great.
I do.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. No, but it's so true, and it's funny because people will kind of categorize different things throughout the real estate process. No, but again, it's up to us to to educate people. Now there is some difference between, like, say, a conventional appraisal and a VA appraisal. What are some of those differences?
I mean, I could be really snarky about it, and I could say, well, last year conventional appraisals actually came back slower, and they came back at value less than VA, which was actually true. And so, we oftentimes hear about how slow VA appraisals are and how they don't come in value. And certainly, if you go into a real estate group on Facebook, you'll see some of that conversation going on. And I think one of the biggest challenges of understanding VA appraisals versus conventional appraisals is just understanding it's slightly different. On a conventional appraisal, the lender orders through an appraisal management company, an AMC. On VA has their own management company internally, the VA portal. So, like I said earlier in the call, who you work with matters. A lender who doesn't do a lot of VA loans probably isn't good at ordering that appraisal very quickly.
Right.
So sometimes when I hear about, appraisals being slow on VA, and I dive into why, it's because the lender did one VA transaction a year and they kept pushing, this person orders it and that person orders it, and who's going to pay for it and how do we do it? Because they don't do a lot of transactions versus ordering it right away like they would do on a conventional. We have to order VA slower. They take 4 days and it goes to this team in Pittsburgh and it bounces around. You can see why that would cause a delay and a misperception in the real estate market.
You're listening to the Bryan G Real Estate Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about me, check out my YouTube channel, Bryan Gutierrez Keller Williams Real Estate, or go to my Facebook page, Bryan Gutierrez Keller Williams. And if you want to hear more of this podcast, please subscribe. Now back to the show. I think the main reason why people associate VA and FHA immediately is the fact that with the appraisal, there can be some suggested repairs, correct? And I think this is where most people are like, when someone buys conventional, after you've had your home inspection, you're buying the home as is, right? And with the appraisal, it's just based on, dollar value, right? Like what the value loan will be. So, so what can some of these repairs be?
Well, in the lending world, they call them MPRs, minimum property requirements. That's kind of what it says in the VA handbook. If you want to geek out,
Okay.
it's the VA 26-7 minimum property requirements.
For engineers and lawyers out there. There you go.
So yes, the VA has a list of minimum property requirements. The basic understanding to it is the house has to be safe, sound, secure. Some people say sanitary, but the 3 S's.
Okay.
So ultimately, the home has to be livable, if you will.
Okay.
Now, you can dive into all the specifics and ask questions about like, oh, the roof, the siding, all that kind of stuff. The first question I always ask when a veteran seller or a buyer or an agent is asking me is like, hey, does this house actually need repairs? Is it a good house? Like, oh yeah, the house was built 3 years ago. Okay, it's going to be totally fine then. It's going to be just like any other appraisal. There's literally almost nothing to worry about.
Right.
Most of the time when you run into things that are related to the VA minimum property requirements, it's stuff that you kind of know when you first look at the house.
True.
Oh, there's siding missing. Oh, there, like this paint is chipping all over the place.
Right.
Wow, this carpet smells like cat pee. This is really, 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 really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the major items that get pulled up are things that would probably get noted on a conventional appraisal as well.
And in a home inspection.
And in a home inspection too.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah. So a few examples I have, probably the most, the most like notorious repair is chipped and peeling paint. Again, so now if you're, you know, when we're looking at a home to purchase, and I have the buyer with VA, we do look at a couple things like that. I had someone buying VA, and the house was in generally really good condition. There was a missing handrail going down into the basement.
Yep.
That was one. And there was also some peeling paint on the outside shed and on some of the fascia boards on the house. It was a sided house, but you know, it's just some trim stuff.
Yep.
And so again, working with the experienced agent is I was talking with my VA buyer and I said, okay, all right, you're interested in this house. We're going to write an offer, you know, just so you know, we got some peeling paint. We got a missing handrail. You know, this is something that I noticed sometimes gets flagged. So to be competitive, I had the buyer say, hey, look, let's put in our purchase agreement that we will, you know, paint that shed that's peeling and paint those fascia boards. We have a handyman come in and that same handyman will put on a rail. And we actually put that into the purchase agreement when we submitted that offer.
I like it.
And so what does it tell that listing agent? They're like, oh, okay, these people kind of saw what's obvious. And so, and they've already prepared for it and the buyer's willing to absorb that cost. So that's, you know, that doesn't drain on me as a seller, right? See, that's where an experienced agent who can help advise that way, it really becomes helpful. You know, like crumbling staircases, anything that's just basically unsafe, right? But I mean, most of the time, I've had very little problem with VA.
The two big ones that come up that are a little bit more difficult to completely avoid, and it's the handrails and the chipping paint. Those are the two things that we don't always win. Now, what I do want to point out is that most lenders and most realtors aren't even aware that the VA has a process where if you don't agree with the appraiser's assessment of the property condition, and the appraiser says, hey, I don't believe that this house meets minimum property requirements because of these, I'm going to pick a great example, and this is the one that they talk about all the time, these trip hazards.
Oh, yes.
Trip hazards. Now, you can take that and you can literally go to the VA and request a minimum property requirement waiver, an NPR waiver.
Okay, now, I'll be devil's advocate here.
Yep.
Is this like talking to any other appraiser who just generally will do nothing for you?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is where who you work with matters, because most lenders and realtors do not know his opinion no longer matters. The VA can override him.
Oh, okay.
This is where the VA home loan program is different.
Gotcha.
Most lenders do not know this.
Because when you have conventional appraiser and they say something and you go back to them, the odds of changing it.
Do you have a soapbox I can get on top of real quick?
I'll gladly get one.
But no, this is one of the things that is misconstrued and misunderstood in the lending world. And part of the problem is that the loan officers are freaking lazy. They don't look at the appraisal when it comes in. They wait for it to be reviewed by somebody else on their team. By the time they go, oh yeah, we got this appraisal and it needs repairs. They've been sitting on it 5 or 6 days. Then they go to the agents. They go, oh, great, it needs repairs. And then maybe the agents sit on it for a few more days. Next thing you know, you're like a week or two away from closing. You don't have a whole lot of time to go to the VA and ask them to look at it. Oh, can we get a rush on that? Like,
Right.
If the VA takes a day or two or three, but you catch them way upstream, you got a pretty good chance, especially on a trip hazard. That trip
Sure.
hazard question was asked the last time I went to um, the lenders conference. The VA is actually super cool. They have an annual lenders conference and they invite people in to talk to them. And they even, the guy who's in charge of appraisals nationwide was on stage and people kept saying trip hazard and he was just laughing. He's like, what are you guys talking about? This isn't a thing. He's like, it isn't in Webster's. It isn't in our handbook. He's like, we don't know where the appraisers come up with this.
And
They're making it up.
right. And once again, this is where experience counts.
Mm-hmm.
So when I have an appraisal come in, myself, the agent, I know to look for those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not sitting in my inbox
Yep.
for 4 days. First thing I get a VA appraisal and I'm looking at it. Is there anything, whatever? And of course, the good loan officers automatically, when it comes in, looking for that too.
Mm-hmm.
And then that way we're getting on the phone right away. Hey, we saw this condition come up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now we'll address it and we'll get it done quickly. Like you said, as opposed to letting it sit for a week and you lost a week's time. Right?
I think you really though hit the nail on the head when you were talking about, having a buyer who saw a house that did have some handrails missing and did need some paint, and they said, let's go ahead at Bryan's suggestion and offer to pay that. In this market, the sellers probably got some more offers coming in. It's maybe some competitive, and if we push too hard, they may not take our deal. And a lot of agents don't think they can do that. They don't know because, again, they don't study the VA product. Their lenders don't coach them or work with them on understanding the guidelines. The vet can absolutely pay for those repairs, just like you said. It doesn't. You'll hear agents say, "Oh, I heard the vet can't pay for repairs." You'll hear lenders say the same thing. Yeah. It's not true. It doesn't say that in the VA handbook.
So part of the inspection is to get a pest inspection, right? To make sure that there's no what's the word I'm looking for?
Just like wood rot or major issues,
termites, carpenter ants, stuff like that. Like just a general thing. And it's something that most home inspectors are qualified to do. Who pays for that? I've heard that the veteran does not pay for that. I heard that the seller pays for that. Can that go either way? That's
another myth that's out there in the real estate community. It's a myth.
Okay.
In today's day and age, most lenders and realtors are still not aware that the VA completely got rid of any rules about who had to pay it.
Excellent.
Almost 2 years ago at this point.
Okay.
So anybody can pay the pest inspection. The veteran can certainly pay it. There's no questions about who can pay it. Now, the veteran in the past, prior to the VA clarifying it with what they call a VA circular, the VA would allow the veteran to pay it if the lender wasn't charging too many what they call unallowable fees, or there weren't too many unallowable fees in the transaction. And that's where the whole story got convoluted, and that's where the myth came from. There were some non-allowable fees, and the non-allowable fees basically come up to 1% of the purchase price. So when properties were selling for $100,000 many, many, many moons ago, back in the days of black and white TV, I guess, if a lender was charging more than $1,000, there's a whole bunch of things that became unallowable. Oh, well, now you can't charge a title closing fee. Now you can't charge a pest inspection fee. So that's where those myths started. And that's where the myth that persists today. You still see purchase agreements in templates written where the seller has to pay the pest, or the seller has to pay the title closing fee. And it's because many moons ago, when the purchase transactions were lower, that 1% number oftentimes was exceeded by lender fees and title fees and other fees. And well, today's day and age, at $300,000 or $400,000 transactions, very rarely do you see the fees exceeding that 1% or that $3,000 or $4,000 threshold. So even if the VA didn't clarify the pest inspection thing, it would fall under their old rule, be under 1%. But they were very, very clear about that. And the other thing they were very clear about in Michigan was site condos. I hear all the time, oh, the VA can't do condos in Michigan. I'm buying a site condo and now I can't use VA. Oh my gosh. Yeah. If you're a Michigan agent or veteran, like don't listen to anybody that tells you can't use VA in a site condo. It's just not true.
This is all great to know. This is going very, very well. Answering all these questions for people. This is so helpful. Let's say someone's a veteran and they have not used their VA financing yet. How do they get started? How do they get into getting that going?
Good question. Very important question. It's a question we get all the time. Typically, if a veteran is trying to use their VA home loan benefit, Step one is for them to get a copy of their certificate of eligibility. Now they can get it themselves in their VA portal if they still have their logins, or they can get it from a lender that typically knows how to pull it. If they're going to a lender, they usually will need copies of their discharge paperwork, or if
Okay.
they're active, they're going to need a statement of service. If they're National Guard, they'll need National Guard Bureau forms. And again, who you work with matters. A good lender will know how to tell them what forms to get. And then we'll go into the VA system. In our world, it's called VA Web LGY. We'll pull a copy for them.
Okay.
That certificate shows that they have earned the VA home loan benefit. That's really the first step of the process. Once we
Okay.
ascertain for sure that they've earned it, then we can start talking to them about how they would qualify
Gotcha.
and about what the numbers might look like
Okay.
and what purchase price ranges would equate to payments and cash numbers that make sense for them.
So a good loan officer like you, they can come to you, and then you can pull that information and then verify it with the buyer.
Yep.
Because I know it's hard for a lot of people. I mean, government websites are from 1987, right? they're so hard to work, but you can help with that, right?
Yeah,
You can help gather that information.
In today's day and age, many of the vets of the last couple decades, we can actually pull while we're on the phone. We can pull with just birth date and social. We don't even need to get the military paperwork.
Oh, great!
Because they've been updating the systems for many years to be more automated.
Oh, good.
So in some cases, it's a pretty quick process. But certainly, it's an important step. And I know vets that have come to us and said, like, "Oh, I know for sure I'm going to get one. No big deal." But we still want to go through the steps because us having that paperwork in hand becomes super important when we're talking to other agents. We talked earlier in this call about getting an offer accepted. Mm-hmm. So, Bryan, you're working with the vet and they're putting an offer in, and then, I'm on your lending team, and the agent on the other side of the table, in our world, we call them cooperative agents.
Mm-hmm.
One's on one side, one's on the other side. They're cooperating, trying to get a transaction done.
Yeah, hopefully they are.
Right. In theory, by definition, they are. But on the other side of the table, that vet comes to you and I and says, okay, I went to Michael Fischer's VA class, because he's the best. And I know that, vets have to have a certificate of eligibility. Mike, have you pulled this yet? And if I go, yeah, and I don't sound like I'm telling the truth, again, I'm a terrible liar. So I would tell the truth. I would say, yes, I absolutely have a copy of that. And, we've pulled the credit. We've looked at his income and assets. We've run what we need to run through underwriting, all that kind of stuff. So it makes it a lot easier for us to help negotiate to get that offer accepted. We know we have the paperwork. Plus, that certificate of eligibility shows us lots of things about the vet that are important to the lending process. It'll show if they're receiving VA disability, shows the exact dollar amount. So it saves paperwork. We don't have to go back to the vet and say, hey, I need your disability paperwork. It's already there for us. Gotcha. It saves us a step. So
good.
Yep.
Now, another question that I get all the time is, I'm a veteran. My current home, I've used VA financing to purchase. I'm looking to sell this and I'm going to move. Is veteran financing just a one-time benefit, or can I do it multiple homes?
Oh, it's like we're teaching the myth busting class, and you've been to this class that we teach. But yes, this is another one of the myths in real estate. And, certainly the realtors think this, and a lot of times the veterans, because again, they don't know their benefits. They get a very short transition class, TAPS class when they get out of the military. There's only maybe 5 to 10 to 30 minutes on VA financing, and they usually forget it, right? It's like the last day of high school. They're ready to go. And you
your eyes glass over.
Exactly. So yes, you can absolutely use your VA home loan benefit again and again. It's a benefit that is always there. But there's a few caveats. Caveat number one, it's always got to be for a primary residence.
Okay.
Can't use second home, can't buy investment property.
So you can't buy a cabin up north, right?
Unless you're moving to it.
If you're living in a home.
Unless you're moving to it. I just closed one like that last month.
Okay.
Somebody has a mobile job in Canton, wants to rent out their house financed by a VA loan in Canton, and wants to move their mobile business, accounting and IT, to Cadillac.
Okay.
All day they can use VA.
Great.
Because their job is not, there's zero face-to-face interaction. They can prove that, and they want to do primary residence, passes the sniff test. So this is where the lenders and realtors and vets get a little bit confused on how that works. So if a veteran has used one VA home loan and they're going to keep a house and they're looking to use VA again, the VA does put a max on how much they could borrow at that point. Okay.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
so the key to understanding that is understanding kind of where the county limits fall.
Okay.
And so, like I said before, I don't want to do too much public math because over time the limits will change. But right now, we're in
Hmm.
the mid 700s, just for the sake of argument.
Okay.
So, for the sake of argument, public math, let's just say it's somewhere around 700. Let's say their house in Canton was somewhere around 300. We just subtract those two. We have roughly 400 left, and they could still buy zero down for another primary residence and have two houses with VA financing on them because they're kind of under that loan limit.
Oh
So,
wow, so that's all right. So it works on the maximum loan limit, and of course, if it, verifying income and things like that, we
yep,
this still is a loan, right?
yep.
There's we
Yeah. Well, in this case, and this is where we talk about learning how to build wealth and manage debt. This is a perfect example of a case where, the veteran analyzed, should I sell this house or can I convert it to a rental?
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about tax benefits, capital gains, what the rules are for selling a property that you've lived in versus owned as a rental.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about, cash flow and all those types of things that would happen when you have a rental. And you'll see a lot of people in the real estate space saying like, hey, you should never ever sell real estate. That's one of the best ways to accumulate wealth.
Sure.
Well, that VA home loan benefit allows you to buy like two houses for zero down. What a great way to get ahead. So
Sure.
some people will hear that. They'll hear that tiny piece of the clip and they'll misconstrue what I said. Oh, Mike's giving people wrong information. No, the first house was purchased as a primary residence. The true intention was to live in that house.
Right.
In the case I'm talking about, the person lived in the house for like 10 plus years. Okay.
Right.
Clearly a primary residence.
It was legit primary residence.
Yes. Now they're converting it to a rental after that.
Right.
And then they're moving to another property that they're also acquiring at zero down.
Right. So the homestead exemption is being taken off of what's now going to be the rental and applied to where they're purchasing in Cadillac.
Correct.
That's a very important detail to notice.
Yep. So again, understanding the different ways to use your VA home loan benefit to build wealth and or manage debt. Now, this didn't necessarily apply in this case, but that could have perhaps done a VA cash out refinance at some point and, like rolled all their debts into their house and started businesses and things like that using their home equity, then bought another house. So like this benefit gives lots of opportunities for veterans. And I think one of the biggest missed opportunities, I didn't specifically ask this, but man, I want to talk about it just in case there's one person that listens to this podcast and catches this.
I'm intrigued. Okay.
A lot of vets don't start young enough. They don't start soon enough in using their VA home loan benefit.
Oh, interesting.
They're serving and they're like, I'm young, I'm not married, I don't need to buy a house yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk to them about like, hey, you could convert your primary residence to investment property. You can even use VA to buy a multi-unit house, a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 unit. And I'll hear all the time vets that are kind of coming to me post-service, because that's when most of them buy. Most of them buy post-service.
Right.
And they'll say like, oh man, I heard you talking about being able to buy a 2 or 3 or 4 unit. I really wish I would have known that when I was serving. I would have bought one at my first duty station.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I would have just hung on to that thing for my entire life because there's so many people that need housing right around the base. I could have been, and I was wondering, like, what are all these landlords? All these landlords are vets that learn how to use the VA home loan benefit.
Oh,
and they're just building wealth over the course of decades.
Oh yeah, imagine if you're in a service and you're living off base. You got a 4-unit place. You live in 1 unit, rent the other 3 out. Like you said, then if you get transferred or if you move out of service, then now it's just
harder to do if you have a wife and a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old.
Right.
Hey, let's go buy a 4-unit, babe. Kids will love it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And not only that,
great.
They can use the rents to qualify. So sometimes you'll hear them say, oh, I'm never going to qualify for that. I don't necessarily make enough right now since I'm in the service. Well, if you use the rents to qualify.
Oh, as the income potential to be applied to the loan counts.
Yes.
Is what you're saying.
Yes. Now they have to have decent credit and they have to have some reserves in the bank. It's not like a slam dunk. You hear some misinformation about that going on.
Sure.
I've had folks reach out to me that had like not so good credit and didn't really have any reserves. The VA puts a few caveats to make sure the people that are doing that are prepared, right?
So, sure.
But again,
because it is still a loan, so we have to make sure we can pay back the loan. So those checks and balances definitely need to be there. No, that makes total sense.
There's a lot of different facets to the home loan benefit that we could kind of spin off and talk about. But one of the things I like to always make sure I'm telling the vets about is that the VA refinance, just when rates get better, it's called an interest rate refinance interest rate reduction refinance loan. ERL.
Okay.
Lots of R's in there. You get tongue tied sometimes.
Another acronym. There you go.
It's one of the easiest refinances to do.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily require appraisal or employment verification. And it's typically something that's very inexpensive because it doesn't require a lot of verifications.
Okay.
So the lenders can do it at a very reduced cost.
Oh, great.
And it's the cool thing about it that I see is that it's so easy and cheap that a lot of times when people reach out to us to refinance, they're like, oh man, I'm switching jobs, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Like my credit's going up, my credit's going down. Like I don't even know if I can refinance. They feel like they're held back from it.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
I think the VA making the refinance so easy is a big benefit because people that might have qualified when they bought the house and their income changed
Mm-hmm.
sometimes hear like, oh, you can't qualify. And then they have to sell their house, right?
Right.
Versus I refinanced a ton of people in 2020 and 2021 who I didn't necessarily need to go through the income, but man, I don't know if I would have wanted to with COVID and all that stuff going on.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's such an easy process. So like
Right.
sometimes you'll hear vets getting talked into conventional, say, oh, just do conventional and use your VA later. It's bad advice because they took away that ability for the vet to use a really easy refinance if rates came down.
Right.
Number one. And number two, if the vet does not have a disability rating, refinancing from conventional to VA is considered a cash out refi. It's what the VA calls it.
Hmm.
And it has a very expensive over 3% finance funding fee.
Ooh, wow.
That most agents and lenders aren't thinking about when they tell that veteran to use conventional and just refinance to VA later. I hate that advice.
Wow.
That's not good advice.
No, that's not.
Unless the veteran knows, I'm exempt. I have a rating, so I don't have a funding fee. And, in this case, maybe the conventional is better for one reason or another. The refinancing to VA later, okay, fine, cool. But if that veteran doesn't have a rating, and I'm telling you, most of these lenders and agents don't even know, they don't even ask. They just say use conventional because that's how we're going to get your offer accepted.
Right.
As opposed to busting the myths, showing proof of funds, negotiating, doing all that stuff. They say, oh, this is the easier path. And then the veterans come back to somebody like me and go, oh, hey, Mike, I heard you're good at refinances. And my agent told me I could refinance to VA later. And then I'm the one that has to give them the bad news and show them this big, big fee. And I'm not like, oh my God, if you would use VA up front,
right,
you wouldn't have this. And you could get this low rate VA with almost no costs, but you can't now because you're doing it the wrong way.
And you're right. That is another myth, is that conventional is not always the easy button, right? I mean, it's not.
I mean, I try really hard not to do public math and public stats because they change over time and over the years.
Sure,
but the last quarter worth of stats, VA, and I've got this somewhere on my social media profile, VA loans actually were approved and closed at a higher percentage than conventional loans did.
There you go.
It's a more flexible program. More of the applications actually closed.
Right.
So
how can mortgage professionals and real estate professionals like me, what can we do to better service our veterans?
Well, I think one of the best things that you can do is just stay connected with communities and with people that like to be educated and like to learn better ways to help veterans build wealth, manage debt, get offers accepted, those really important things. Because listening to others' perspectives, no matter how many years you've been in the business, no matter how many transactions you've done, every time you start connecting with people who have a like-minded mission to help veterans learn the benefit and serve, you pick something up. You pick up a good idea, a better way to explain something, a better way to do something you just didn't know. Like, hey, I hadn't really realized that the vet could pay for the pest. It hadn't come up. My sellers have been paying it. It just, nobody said anything to me about it. And all of a sudden, wow, I just realized that today, that kind of thing. So it's staying connected, number one, but for a lot of lenders and real estate agents, it's taking the first step to learn more, to maybe take an MRP class or come to a class like one of the classes that we teach. I mean, I'm working on another program. I don't want to vague it too much, but Veteran Housing Advisor is going to be a program that we have coming out soon. People can probably look that one up and track us down. But learning as much as you can about the process, and also learning that there's a lot of opportunity around you on a daily basis that you're probably not taking advantage of as an industry professional because you're maybe not asking enough questions or asking the right questions.
Right. Okay.
Every time we start breaking down demographics, we figure out that there's a lot more veterans that are buying houses in any given area than most people think.
Hmm.
And a lot of times people
Interesting.
think, whoa, there's just not a lot of vets in my area. Well, whenever we see the NAR stats come in, typically almost 20% of the people that are buying in almost every single state are vets. It's a huge chunk. It's not a tiny niche, it's a big chunk. But a lot of times that group of 20 is cut down to 6, 7, 8, 9% that are actually using the VA home loan benefit because they're
Gotcha.
actually getting talked out of it a lot of times by the real estate agents and by the loan officers.
Yeah, and I find that appalling.
Well,
I
in the
really
vets,
do.
actually, they generally buy more homes in their lifetime than the average civilian. They're the best client a realtor would have, and they buy more houses.
And yeah, they
They
move a lot.
they're actually, most of the time, they're more loyal too if you learn how to ask them the right way for referrals, and if you've actually done a good job servicing and helping them, they're usually pretty loyal when it comes to that. And so a lot of the friends that I have in lending in real estate have kind of realized this, and
Mhm.
people are like, "What's the secret to your success?" And it's like, well, I kick ass daily, and I ask for referrals. You know,
Right. And that
ask.
also comes down to, motivation of the client,
Mhm,
right? Having that strong consumer confidence working with a professional like
mhm,
you or myself is that's a really good point that military personnel are very loyal.
mhm,
They are, right? You know that when a veteran comes to you to submit an offer on your house, and if they're confident with their team, you, myself, we're backing them up. We're bringing this offer to you. They are committed. They're loyal. I really feel, now it's not to say that other people aren't, but I think on a
mhm,
higher percentage, military people once they've made a commitment, they
mhm.
follow through,
Now
right? And they are loyal
they do, they
to
do.
us, to the process, and to the offer that they made. It's their word.
Uh,
And I think with the military group of
mhm.
people, that is stronger than I think what we mostly see on the street. Would
I
you agree?
I tell you what I think that a lot of them tell me that they're looking for, and it's maybe not this. Maybe this isn't the best word, but I use the word a lot, and it's that's an advisor person. That's a person that's going to help give them what they need to know to make a good decision. And
Right.
a lot of people in the mortgage and real estate space focus all their energy on marketing and selling, and not, maybe not all of it, but they put so much of it into marketing and selling and not quite enough into advising. And so, my ask for the real estate and lending community was like, guys, start doing things like Bryan's doing today. Put more content out there where you're trying to give people good advice. You're trying to give them help. You're trying to help them learn what works for them so that they can make good choices. And then the whole marketing and selling part won't even be a thing because they're just
Right.
going to say, like, I know I need to work with this person because they know what they're doing and they're very helpful.
Mhm.
And I find that, when we take a veteran who is newer to the process and kind of learning and hasn't really figured out all the steps yet, and we slow down and we explain these things to them, and then we back it up in writing, and we do custom presentations for them. We break down all the numbers, we show them what their cash to close is going to be, and we explain to them about moving across different states and things like that and how it works with the VA. We even show them sometimes what the guidelines say
Mhm.
so that they can learn how to use these things correctly to time their moves and to buy other houses. Man, they love us, and they
Right.
love the feedback, and a lot of times they'll come back and say, like people don't do it like you. It's like, well, yes, because it takes more time and energy, and it's
Right.
not easy. It's not easy to
Right.
learn the things and to do the extra work, but man, I mean, like, they deserve it. I mean, they.
And what it comes down for myself as an agent is I'm not going to know everything, but know the people who you can go to as the
Yep.
resource, people like you. And is there anything else you'd like to add about VA?
I think that if you're a veteran, you're looking to buy a house, you should be talking to someone that has dedicated themselves to a slightly higher level of education in the VA space. If it's somebody that has one of the veteran mortgage advisor logos that's in the community that I run, I guarantee I've certified them to do a little bit more work than the average bear. Like I said, we're working on veteran housing advisor. Folks like Bryan would have taken the classes and done the work
Hmm.
to not just certify that they took a test, but to show that they are interacting in the right communities. They're thinking about these things. They're studying these things. They're staying abreast of changes. They're learning better ways to help people negotiate and finding the inches and the ways to help our veteran home buyers win.
Right.
I think the more I dive into this as a professional, the more I look back and I maybe should started the whole podcast with this, but like I myself am not a veteran. My father served, my father served in Vietnam. I have like all kinds of uncles and all this stuff. And at some point in my life, I looked at it and said, well, man, like, why didn't I do this? And what am I doing to honor these people before me? And I'm like, geez, I'm not even good at this in my own job. Like, I got to get better at this. I really need to be better at VA loans. Like
Right.
part of the reason I was able to live a cool life is because my dad was able to use the VA home loan benefit to have zero college debt.
There you go.
Was able to use the VA home loan benefit to buy cool houses in and around like Grand Bank, Milford, and live in good communities and all that kind of stuff. But that wouldn't have been there if it weren't for the VA home loan benefits. The generations before my father didn't live like that. They were poor. And that opportunity that's there, it just needs to be talked about more because there's so many of our nation's vets that go through, and then you hear the stories about them struggling to find employment and PTSD and all these terrible things. I tell you what, if you get them into a house, a lot of that goes away.
Yes,
They become much more committed at their work. The family unit stays together more, and a lot of it starts with housing, and it starts with people in our industry stepping up and saying like, no more. I'm tired of this. I'm going to quit saying this VA home loan benefit is not a good benefit. I'm going to understand why sometimes the other realtors and lenders aren't doing a good job with it, and I'm going to learn how to just work with the product that we have.
Right.
When somebody, when a realtor and a lender know the product, people like on the team I have, they close the VA loans at the exact same timeline or quicker than any other loan product. It's just knowing what you're doing makes a difference.
And that's great. So, Michael, it's been great speaking with you today. Thank you so much for coming on. We're going to put in our podcast post here, we're going to have all the links to Michael Fischer from Ross Mortgage. Real quick, if you wouldn't mind just saying, how can people find you?
They can find Michael Fischer, Ross Mortgage, Brighton. I mean, I'm pretty easy to Google.
All right.
They can go to mfisherloans.com. They can find me on Facebook. They can find me on LinkedIn. But I mean, you have to look up loan officer. There's lots of Michael Fischers out there. But it's a hockey player, I think. I wish people would mistake me with him more often. But
there's a football player who's Bryan Gutierrez. And when I Google myself, it comes up he and I, right? So
fun fact, there's a guy that works at Cattails Golf Course named Michael Fischer. And so it's just kind of funny because people say, oh, now on the first tee, Mike Fischer. And everyone's like, well, that's the guy that works there. I'm like, no, it's me. Whatever. Well,
great. And you can also, if you want to learn more about not only VA, but also real estate in general, feel free to visit my YouTube channel. It's Bryan Gutierrez, Keller Williams Real Estate. Also my Facebook page, Bryan Gutierrez, Keller Williams. And so if you're a veteran out there and you have questions about your VA benefits, please reach out to either one of us. We will connect you to our team here and definitely get you the information that you need to make an informed decision and get that dream house you've always wanted. So,
Brian, we know people all over the country too.
That's right.
lots of different states, lots of areas.
Well, Michael, once again, thanks for coming on. This is super valuable, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, and I hope folks have at least a takeaway or two. If you need anything, reach out, let us know.
Great. Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.